Autumn 1983 Wisconsin. The kind of cold that wakes you before dawn and makes every breath feel like metal. My name's Sergeant Daniel Hart, Wisconsin National Guard, 2nd Battalion. We were supposed to be out for a quick weekend field exercise. 2 nights of radio drills, map reading, and bad coffee. But the orders stretched. 3 days turned into 7, and we found ourselves camped along a narrow dirt road outside a quiet place called Bray Road. That part of the state has its own smell. Diesel from the tractors, wood smoke from the barns, and manure carried on the wind. The corn was cut down to hard stubble, fields left bare like shaved skin. Every footstep cracked frost that hadn't seen the sun yet. It was the kind of season that reminds you winter is coming whether you're ready or not. We parked our trucks in a crooked line near a half-fallen silo and set up tents where an old foundation crumbled into the weeds. Nothing fancy, olive canvas, mud under the cots, the usual army comfort. My men grumbled, joked, and smoked like it was another drill. I kept telling them we'd be home before the Packers played on Sunday. I even believed it. That first night, I noticed the stillness. No night birds, no coyotes. Even the farm dogs in the distance were quiet. Usually, rural silence is a kind of music. You can tell what time it is by the sounds. But this was a heavy quiet, like the land was holding its breath. When we ran our first radio checks, we got a thin hiss between call signs. A whistle tone, soft but steady, like someone blowing across a bottle. I blamed the terrain, the humidity, anything that made sense. We switched frequencies. The sound followed us. Private low joke that maybe the Soviets were tuning in. We laughed, but not for long. By midnight, the temperature dropped hard. Frost clung to our gear. Rifles slick with ice. I walked the perimeter alone and watched mist roll low across the stubble fields. The moon made everything look too bright, every fence post like a man standing still. The kind of sight that makes you check twice and move slower the second time. I remember thinking how the air smelled clean, almost sweet, like frozen apples. I pulled my collar up and told myself this was routine. Just another cold weekend in the Midwest. Nothing out there but deer and wind. When I got back to the tent, the radio spat once more, a sharp pop, then that same faint whistle. The younger guys didn't even notice. They were half asleep, boots off, dreaming of warm kitchens and real beds. I sat for a while, listening, waiting for the sound to fade. It didn't. Outside, the frost cracked again, but no one was walking. I told myself it was just the wind. It wasn't. By the second day, we'd turned that lonely patch of farmland into a rough imitation of a base. 4 tents in a crooked square, a radio table under a canvas flap, gear stacked by the trucks like half-frozen soldiers waiting for orders. The old silo beside us leaned like it was tired of standing. Behind it, a stone foundation sank into the earth, what was left of a farmhouse that probably burned down before I was born. The locals said lightning took it, though no one could quite remember when. I didn't think much of that at the time. My team was small but solid. Corporal Haynes, our medic, was the kind of man who'd fix a bullet wound and then scold you for wasting his gauze. He was calm under pressure, liked his coffee black, and his humor drier than sand. Then there was Corporal Mason, our designated marksman. Sarcastic to the bone, the kind of guy who could find something to laugh about at his own funeral. A good shot, better eyes, but never took anything seriously until it mattered. And then there was Private Jamie Ortiz, our newest addition. Barely 20, city kid from Milwaukee. Eager, polite, always one question behind the rest of us. He kept his rifle clean like it was a religious duty. At night, he'd sit near the heater and listen more than he talked. We just finished setting the last tent when an old pickup rattled down the dirt lane. It stopped short of our trucks, engine idling rough. The man who stepped out looked like he'd spent his life fighting weather and losing only by inches. Carl Schmidt, local farmer. His wife, Ruth, stayed in the passenger seat, arms crossed, eyes sharp. She smiled, but it didn't reach far. Carl shook my hand, grip firm as a wrench. "You boys with the guard?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Training exercise shouldn't be in your way long." He nodded, looking past me toward the trees. "You can use that old lane by the silo. Won't bother nobody there." I thanked him and offered a handshake again. He didn't let go right away. "You keep your lights low at night," he said. "Coyotes?" I asked. He hesitated, jaw tightening. "Maybe. Something big's been spooking the livestock lately. Broke a fence on my neighbor's pasture 2 nights back, and a gate clean off. Bears? Haynes asked, half grinning. Carl looked at him flat and humorless. If it's a bear, it's walking on 2 legs. That's when Ruth finally spoke from the truck window. Don't stay too close to the woods after dark. Then she told him, let's go, and they drove off in a trail of coal dust. Back at camp, Mason let out a laugh. Behold the legendary Bray Beast. Half man, half coyote, all Wisconsin. Ortiz chuckled nervously. You think they were serious? About the bear man? Mason said. Sure. Folks around here probably still think Elvis runs the bait shop. Even Haynes smiled, though not for long. I didn't laugh. Something about Carl's tone stuck with me. He wasn't telling a story for fun. He was warning us. You can hear the difference. That night, the temperature dropped again. The sky went clear and sharp, stars cutting through the black like nails. The campfire burned small but steady. Mason played with his lighter. Ortiz cleaned his rifle for the 3rd time. When the wind shifted, I caught the faint smell of manure and something else, something older. It came from the tree line, the same direction Carl had looked when he said something big. I told myself it was just the smell of the marsh. But every now and then, I thought I saw movement between the oaks. A flicker of shape. Gone before I could focus. Mason cracked another joke about the Bray Beast, and everyone laughed again, but quieter this time. The kind of laugh people use when they're trying not to sound scared. Before lights out, I walked to the edge of the field and stared into that dark wall of trees. It was quiet again, too quiet. No dogs, no birds, no wind. The kind of silence that makes you wish someone else would break it first. Mornings came slow out there. You'd wake up to the kind of cold that makes your breath look like smoke and your hands feel older than you are. Frost clung to everything, the tent flaps, the trucks, even the coffee mugs if you left them out overnight. We moved stiffly, like machines running on old oil. Someone always burned the first pot of coffee, and someone else always swore it was the best they'd ever had. That's soldier logic for you. If it's bad, pretend it's perfect. Haynes kept the fire steady, Mason griped about rations, and Ortiz sat on a folding crate, scribbling something in a little notebook he kept in his pocket. When I asked what it was, he said, "Just notes, Sergeant. Stuff I don't want to forget." He didn't mean it like a joke. By mid-morning, the frost melted and the mud came back. We cleaned rifles, checked comms, and argued about football. Mason was convinced the Packers were finally going to make a comeback that year. Haynes said they'd choke by Thanksgiving. Ortiz just nodded along, smiling the way quiet people do when they don't really follow the conversation, but enjoy hearing it anyway. It was normal, boring, even. The kind of routine that makes you forget you're miles from anywhere. Then, little by little, the normal started to fray. It began with the radios. They'd hum, spit static, then drop a transmission halfway through. 1 second you'd hear Alpha to Bravo do you, and then nothing. A dead channel. We swapped batteries. We rechecked frequencies. Still, the gaps kept happening, almost like someone was cutting in and out on purpose. At first, I thought it was interference from the hills. But Haynes pointed out that it only happened after sunset. That was harder to explain. The animals changed too, or rather, disappeared. The first 2 nights we'd heard coyotes far off, yipping near the fields. By the 3rd night, the woods were silent. No frogs, no crickets, nothing. Just wind, soft and slow. Silence isn't peace. In the field, silence is warning. Mason made jokes to fill it. He'd whistle while cleaning his rifle or tell stories about a girl back in Appleton who supposedly mailed him cookies shaped like grenades. We'd laugh, but it never lasted long. The quiet would always come back, heavier than before. On the 4th day, we went to reset one of the perimeter markers along the tree line. That's when Ortiz stopped walking. He was staring up at a pine tree, tall, straight, maybe 40 feet high. Near the middle of the trunk, just below the first branch, something had torn the bark away in long vertical grooves. 4 of them. Deep, fresh. Bear, Mason said automatically, the way people do when they need a word to make sense of what they're seeing. But bears don't climb pines that clean, and they don't leave marks that high. Ortiz looked pale. "It's too straight," he said quietly, like something reached up, not down. We took photos, logged the location, and moved on. But the rest of the day felt different. The laughter came slower. The wind sounded sharper. Every creak from the trees made Ortiz flinch. That night, the radio cut out again, mid-sentence, same as before. Haynes banged the side of the transceiver. Mason cursed. and Ortiz just sat staring at the tent flap like he was listening for something outside. When I stepped out to check the perimeter, the moon was bright and full. I could see the frost already forming on the truck hoods. The world looked too still, too clean. Something moved in the far dark, just enough to make my breath catch, but when I blinked, it was gone. I went back inside and didn't say a word. Instead, I laid down with my boots still on, laces loose. Didn't seem like much at the time, but that's how it starts. Small habits you don't plan, getting ready for something you don't yet believe in. By midweek, the air itself felt wrong. You could taste the cold in the back of your throat and hear it in the wires when the wind passed through camp. Even the static from the radio had a texture, thin, sharp, almost alive. At first, we thought it was just bad weather, maybe solar interference. But then the pattern started. Not random hiss anymore. It came in bursts, short, long, then a pause, then again. Ortiz was the first to notice. He was sitting by the set after dark, notebook open, scribbling lines and dots like he was tracking Morse code. He looked up at me and said, "Sergeant, it's not static. Someone's keying the mic." I told him that was impossible. We were miles from the nearest unit, and no one else was on our frequency. He didn't argue, just turned the volume up a little. The clicking came again. 4 short bursts, then silence, then a faint whistle, like someone blowing gently across a bottle. It raised the hair on my arms. Mason laughed it off. Probably some trucker playing with a CB or ghosts. Take your pick. But no one laughed with him this time. The next morning, Carl Schmidt drove by again in his pickup. He didn't get out, just leaned out the window and waved us over. Haynes went first. They spoke low, voices muffled by the wind. When I walked up, Carl's face was pale under the brim of his cap. He said 3 farms in the next county had lost animals overnight. Goats, sheep, even a calf. Not just killed, opened. He used that word. Opened like you'd open a deer, only cleaner. He said there wasn't a drop of blood on the ground. Ruth was with him again, sitting stiff in the truck. She had a pie tin in her lap, steam still rising through the foil. She handed it to me and said softly, "For your men." Then she leaned closer and whispered, "You boys shouldn't stay past dark." Her voice cracked on the word dark. I didn't have a reply for that. That afternoon, Ortiz checked the radio again. The clicking was gone, but every so often there'd be a single sharp pop, followed by a hiss that lasted too long. Haynes said maybe it was just feedback. Ortiz shook his head. "It's breathing," he said. "Listen, that night we ate Ruth's pie by lantern light. Apple and cinnamon tasted like something from a different world, something safe. For a few minutes, we were just men again." Mason told another story about his ex-wife and a wedding ring she supposedly flushed down a toilet. Everyone laughed. Even Ortiz cracked a smile. Then the wind shifted and the laughter stopped. Somewhere beyond the tents, a branch snapped. It wasn't loud, but it was close. We went quiet, listening. The woods gave nothing back. No footsteps, no breath. Just the faint hum of the radio inside the tent, whispering its long, steady hiss. I made a slow circuit around camp with my flashlight off. The moon was bright enough to see the field in shades of silver. The silo cast a long, crooked shadow across the trucks. Halfway through the sweep, I felt it. That sense you get when you're not alone, like a weight pressing down behind your neck. Something moved in the dark, too big for a raccoon, too quiet for a deer. It stayed out of sight, just beyond the reach of the moonlight, circling slow. Always just far enough that I couldn't see it, only hear the faint scrape of dirt shifting under its weight. I stopped walking. Whatever it was, it stopped too. We stood there in that cold silence, 2 things pretending not to breathe. And then, just as the wind picked up, I heard that sound again, that faint whistle, the same one from the radio. I turned toward it, but there was nothing there. That night, something circled our camp and never stepped in. By Thursday night, the static wasn't the only thing that made our skin crawl. The woods had gone dead silent again, and every man in the unit could feel it. You start to notice patterns when you've been out long enough, the way sound carries through trees, the rhythm of wind moving through the fields. But this wasn't silence. This was absence, like the whole world was holding its breath and waiting for something to happen. The captain wanted another sweep of the perimeter before lights out, routine procedure. We'd stretched wire alarms between trees and needed to make sure the line hadn't frozen over or snapped. He sent Corporal Mason and Private Ortiz halfway down the west side. They were good together, the loudmouth and the quiet kid. I gave them a radio, told them to keep in contact every 10 minutes. They joked about earning extra rations for babysitting the woods. I smiled, but something about it sat wrong. I can't explain why. It just did. 10 minutes passed. Nothing. I called their unit frequency. Static. 15 minutes. Still nothing. At 20, Haynes frowned and said they probably went further down than planned. I nodded, but my gut said otherwise. At the 30-minute mark, I grabbed my rifle and told Haynes to stay on the line. I took Private Lang, one of our other men, and headed west. The ground crunched under frost, and every exhale turned to mist. The light from camp faded behind us until all we had was the narrow glow of our flashlights bouncing off trees. About 200 yards out, I found the first boot print, then another, then 2 sets moving side by side. The spacing looked normal, steady pace, deliberate. But 20 feet later, the prints started to stagger. The spacing widened like they'd started running. And then, they just stopped. Not faded. Stopped. Right in the middle of the path, like both men had been lifted straight off the ground. I froze. Lang said maybe they'd doubled back, but there were no returning tracks, no drag marks, no signs of struggle. Just 2 pairs of boots sitting neatly in the dirt, still warm when I touched them. I tried the radio again. Mason Ortiz, come in. Static. Then, a faint click. Another. 4 in rhythm, like a metronome. Lang whispered, "That's them." I didn't answer. I just kept my rifle up and turned in a slow circle. The mist was rising off the fields, creeping in around our ankles. The moonlight broke through the trees in strips, and for a second, I thought I saw movement just beyond the light, something tall, upright, but it melted back into the dark before I could lock onto it. We found them 20 minutes later, not by tracking, but because they walked out of the trees. Both of them. Mason looked pale, like he'd seen the inside of a freezer. His rifle was gone. Ortiz's hands were shaking so hard he could barely keep them at his sides. I called their names. They didn't answer. They just kept walking, eyes wide, fixed straight ahead. When they reached me, Mason stopped first. His mouth opened like he wanted to speak, but no sound came. Ortiz blinked slow, then turned his head toward me. There was blood on his sleeve, not much, just a smear, and his lips were blue. I grabbed his shoulders and said, "Talk to me, Private. What happened?" He looked past me into the trees. Not through me, past me, like he was afraid something was standing right behind. Then he whispered one word. Eyes. That was it. He said it once, then dropped to his knees and started shaking like he was freezing to death. Mason finally spoke, voice hoarse, cracking. "They were watching us," he said. "They never came close, just watched." I got them both back to camp, half carrying Ortiz. Haynes checked their vitals, heart rate spiking, pupils blown. No injuries. No signs of exposure or gas. Just shock. Neither one remembered how they got separated or why their boots were left behind. Mason said 1 second they were on the trail, the next they were standing in the dark with the radio buzzing. Ortiz wouldn't talk at all. He just kept staring at the tent flap, whispering the same word under his breath. Eyes. Captain logged it as disorientation due to fatigue, but I knew better. Whatever was out there hadn't just scared them. It had played with them. And the worst part wasn't that they saw something in the dark. It was that it saw them first. The night after Mason and Ortiz came back, nobody volunteered for watch duty. Can't blame them. Half the men were jumpy, the other half pretending not to be. So, I took the shift myself. Sometimes that's what a sergeant does, stands in the cold so the younger ones can sleep. It was clear that night. Cold enough to make your breath hang like fog, and the moon had a hard silver edge to it. The field stretched out in front of me, a wide plain of cut corn and frozen dirt. The kind of open space that makes you feel smaller the longer you look at it. I leaned against the truck hood, rifle slung, trying not to think about the silence pressing in from the woods. The radio beside me gave its occasional hiss, but otherwise it was dead quiet. Not even the sound of frost cracking. Then, somewhere across the field, maybe 100 yards out, something flickered. 2 faint points of light, low at first, like reflections off a bottle. I squinted. The points moved. Slowly, and then they rose. Not a sway, not a climb, they lifted, straight up, higher than any man's head. 2 amber eyes, burning steady, just above the corn stubble. Every instinct in me kicked at once. I raised my rifle, safety half clicked, but my hands hesitated on the trigger, because those eyes weren't flickering like an animal's. They weren't catching light, they were making it. I stood there, frozen, every muscle tight. The eyes blinked once. Then they were gone. Not faded, gone. The radio popped behind me, a sharp burst of static that made me flinch. When I looked back, the field was empty. I stayed like that for maybe a full minute, rifle raised, breath loud in my ears. Finally, I stepped forward, shining my light toward where I'd seen them. Nothing but frost and flattened stalks. When I turned back toward camp, something else caught my light, near the edge of the trees, maybe 30 yards from our tents. A shape. I moved closer. It was a deer, or what was left of one. Half the body was gone. The rib cage cracked open like someone had pried it apart with a crowbar. The cuts weren't ragged, they were clean. Too clean. No blood in the snow. None on the ground. The rest of the deer looked almost drained. Haynes came running when he heard me swear. Then Mason and Ortiz. We all just stood there, staring at it. Coyotes don't do that, Haynes said. Mason shook his head. No coyote opens a rib cage like a toolbox. We roped off the spot, marked coordinates, and called it in. The local sheriff showed up an hour later, small town guy, older, with tired eyes and a badge that looked like it had seen too many winters. He knelt by the carcass, flashlight trembling a little. Didn't say much at first. Then he stood up, muttered something about calling in wildlife services, and snapped a few photos. His hands were shaking when he put the camera away. Before he left, I asked him quietly, "You seen anything like this before?" He didn't look at me when he answered. "Not lately," he said, then after a long pause, "You boys should pack up sooner rather than later." He got in his cruiser and drove off without another word. When the sound of his tires faded, the men looked at me like I had the answers. I didn't. I just said, "Double the watches. No one alone." That night, no one laughed. No one talked about football or bad coffee or the Packers. We just sat by the dim glow of the heater, rifles close, listening for the next sound that shouldn't exist. And somewhere out past the fields, something breathed, deep and steady, like it was waiting for us to sleep. By the end of that week, the air around camp had turned heavy. Not just cold, heavy. Every man felt it. Like a storm waiting to break, but the clouds never came. Nobody slept more than an hour at a time. We started talking less, snapping more. Little things, someone moving your canteen, someone misplacing a map, would set off arguments that fizzled just as fast. It wasn't about the canteen. It was about the feeling that something was always right behind us, waiting for a crack. The woods didn't sound empty anymore. They sounded alive. Footsteps when no one was walking. A low growl rolling through the tree line, deep enough you felt it in your chest. Sometimes the trip line cans would rattle, and by the time we rushed over, nothing but disturbed leaves and a smell like wood iron. At first, we called it nerves. Mason said it was woods fever, like cabin fever but with more bugs. But even he stopped joking after a few nights. Ortiz got it worst. He started sleeping with his rifle hugged to his chest like a stuffed animal. Kept checking the radio every half hour like a man hoping to hear his name called. I told him to take a break, but he just nodded and stared at the tent wall like he was listening to something outside. Then, on the 5th night, it happened. Ortiz went out alone. Just latrine duty, 30 feet from the tents. We'd all done it 100 times. I heard his boots crunch on frost. Heard the tent flap fall back into place. Then silence. Half a minute later, he screamed. A sound that cracked like a branch under too much weight. We tore out of the tent with rifles up. Mason tripped on a guy line. Haynes grabbed the med kit. My light swung over the brush, cutting strips out of the dark. We found him face down in the dirt, hands clawing at the ground like he was trying to hold on to it. Blood on his calf and forearm, parallel lines, shallow but clean, like something had tried to drag him backwards and he'd fought loose. I rolled him over. His eyes were wide, white showing all around. His breath came in ragged pulls. I asked him what happened. At first, nothing. His mouth opened and closed without sound. Then, a whisper. 2 words, like he was telling himself a secret. It had hands. He started shaking harder, teeth chattering though it wasn't that cold. Mason crouched down, holding his rifle one-handed, scanning the tree line with the other. I saw movement out there, just a flicker, then nothing. We hauled Ortiz back to the tent. Haynes wrapped his wounds. The cuts were strange. No tear marks, no jagged edges. just scored flesh like someone had raked him with fingers tipped in knives. I tried calling command. Static, a burst of clicks, then dead air. For the first time, I felt it, that creeping thought that we weren't just outnumbered. We were outmatched. Whoever, whatever, was out there had been watching us for days, testing our wire, learning our patterns. I sat on my cot, boots still on, rifle across my knees. The younger men huddled close without realizing they were doing it. The older ones smoked in silence, eyes on the tent flap. I kept thinking about Carl Schmitt's warning, about Ruth's whisper, about those amber eyes rising from the field like a signal. I wasn't sure who was running this exercise anymore. I only knew one thing. We weren't the ones in control. By the next evening, we couldn't take the camp anymore. No one said it out loud, but we all knew staying put was suicide. The trip lines went off 3 times that day, and once, Mason swore he saw a figure crouch near the trucks before it melted into the brush. So, we packed fast. The captain gave the order to relocate west, toward an old farmhouse the county still had on record as abandoned. It was higher ground, open fields on every side, better sight lines, fewer shadows. We loaded what we could, rucks, radios, the med kit, extra fuel. Everything else we left behind. The convoy rolled out just before dusk. 3 trucks, 2 jeeps, and 12 tired men who didn't believe their own orders anymore. The road was a narrow, frostbitten strip between the woods and the fields. The sky had that color between blue and black, where light feels like it's hiding. I was in the second truck, riding shotgun. Mason drove, cigarette burning low in his mouth. Ortiz was in the back, quiet, wrapped in a blanket like he wanted to disappear. For a while, it almost felt normal. Engines humming, tires crunching over gravel. We even started to relax, that dangerous moment when your body forgets to be scared. Then the radio hissed. Just once. A short pop, then silence. That's when the first truck braked hard. The tires screamed, headlights swung wild, and something big moved across the road, fast, low, like a shadow with weight. "Deer?" Mason shouted, but it wasn't. The lead driver clipped it. You could feel the hit, not like hitting an animal, more like hitting a boulder wrapped in muscle. The impact threw the hood up, metal shrieking. The truck lurched sideways, then stopped dead. We piled out before the engine even cut off. The men in the first truck were yelling, weapons half raised. One was pointing into the ditch. That's when I saw it. It was standing just beyond the beam of our headlights, a shape that made my stomach twist. 7 feet tall, maybe more. Its shoulders too wide, its head long, angular, like a wolf trying to wear a man's posture. The eyes caught the light and burned like amber coals. The fur was dark, almost black, matted across its arms and chest. But the way it moved, that's what froze me. It didn't lurch or limp like an animal. It stepped, balanced, deliberate. Half man, half something else. All wrong. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then it turned its head, not fast, just enough to show its teeth. Long, wet, sharp. Mason whispered, "Jesus Christ." Then the creature lunged. The lead jeep fired first, 3 short bursts, muzzle flashes strobing the dark. The thing staggered once, then came faster. It hit the hood with a crack like thunder. The whole front end lifted off the ground. A windshield exploded outward. A man screamed. We opened up. Every rifle. Rounds tore through the air, brass hitting the road like rain. I could see sparks jump off its hide, but it didn't fall. It moved between trucks and jerks, 1 second there, the next gone, too fast for its size. Something slammed into the side of our truck. Mason was yanked out through the driver's window, just gone. I spun around, fired into the dark, shouting his name. Ortiz was screaming somewhere behind me, "It's in the ditch! It's in the ditch!" I saw it again, rising from the roadside like a nightmare, pulling itself upright. Its hands, God, they were hands, gripped the fender of the lead jeep, claws digging through metal like butter. I fired until the rifle clicked empty, reloaded. Fired again. Pains lobbed a flare, and for a moment the whole road lit up in bloody red light. In that glow, the creature looked straight at us, chest heaving, blood that wasn't red slicking its side. It made a sound then, a deep, wet growl that didn't belong to any living thing I know. Then it turned. Not ran, turned, and slipped into the tree line like smoke. We stood there, guns shaking in our hands, the flares hissing out one by one. The woods swallowed it whole. The only sound left was the engines idling and someone crying softly in the back of a truck. We regrouped. counted heads. Mason was gone. 2 others injured. Nobody spoke. There wasn't anything to say. I looked down the road into the dark and knew what every man was thinking. It hadn't run because it was scared. It ran because it was done. And it would be back. We reached the farmhouse just before nightfall. It sat low among the fields, roof half collapsed. The paint long since surrendered to the weather. One porch post leaned like it was tired of standing, but the walls were solid, and the line of sight stretched clear in every direction. For soldiers used to shadows, that counted as safety. We unloaded fast. Trucks parked close, engines off, the quiet swallowing us whole. Inside, the air smelled of dust and mice and something old that had soaked into the wood, the kind of smell you get in places the world's forgotten. We cleared every room. 2 floors, 1 staircase that groaned like an old man's knees. Wallpaper faded to gray. A kitchen full of rusted cans and a table still sitting under a broken window, as if someone had left in a hurry and never came back. We set to work. Haynes and I boarded the windows on the first floor. Mason was gone, but his job didn't die with him. I took over his tools. Ortiz rigged trip flares along the road and a line of noisemakers along the west fence. His hands shook, but he worked fast. Fear does that, makes you efficient. By sundown, we'd turned the place into a bunker. 2 men upstairs on watch, 4 downstairs. I planted a last resort in the ditch out front, a small satchel charge wired to a clacker. Not regulation, not in the report, but we were past that now. When darkness fell, the farmhouse went quiet. No one talked, no one slept. You could hear the wood settling, the slow pop of cooling metal, the whisper of wind against the boards. Then, sometime after midnight, the wind stopped. The first sound came from the north wall, a slow scrape like claws dragged across old wood. Then another on the opposite side. The men looked at me. I held up a hand. Wait, listen. Something heavy brushed against the siding, a low thump, then a push that made dust fall from the ceiling. A sound followed it, soft but deep, breathing. Not panting, not growling. Just slow, steady breath, too close, too heavy to be human. Contact front? Haynes whispered. I shook my head. All around. We could hear them moving now. More than one. Footsteps pacing the perimeter. The scratch of claws, the push of weight against the shutters. One leaned on the back wall hard enough that the nails squealed. Ortiz aimed his rifle at the door, whispering a prayer I couldn't make out. Something sniffed at the window frame. A wet exhale came through the cracks, and the smell that followed made my stomach twist, like copper and dirt and something long dead under rain. Haynes mouthed, "What do we do?" I didn't answer. Orders didn't mean much anymore. We were just surviving minutes. The first hit came at the door, a full-body slam that made it bow inward. The dresser we'd wedged against it jumped a few inches off the floor. Ortiz fired through the wood. 3 rounds. The impacts thudded like they hit meat. A howl answered, sharp, furious, too close. Flares popped outside, bathing the yard in red light. Through the window gaps, I saw them, 2 shapes circling, low and fast. Big shoulders, long arms, heads that caught the light wrong. Their eyes burned back at us like coals through smoke. We opened fire. The house filled with noise, the flat crack of rifles, glass shattering, someone shouting orders that no one could hear. Something hit the side wall and started clawing, boards splintering under its weight. Another slammed the door again. Nails screamed. "Fall back," I yelled. We regrouped in the hallway while covering the windows. I could see the boards flax as something pushed against them from outside. One of them, maybe 2, climbed onto the porch roof. The ceiling above us groaned under their weight. You could hear claws dragging across shingles, the thump of steps moving toward the attic. We were surrounded. Haynes grabbed my shoulder. "The charge," he said. "We can draw them out." I knew what he meant. He meant he'd draw them out. I said no. He didn't listen. He grabbed the clacker wire from my vest and ran for the side door. "Cover me," he yelled. Before I could stop him, he kicked it open and vanished into the night. I saw him for just a second in the flare light, sprinting toward the ditch, firing short bursts as he went. The creatures turned, growls rolling over each other. One bounded after him on all 4s, fast and fluid like water-given muscle. Haynes dove for the wire, slammed the clacker shut. The explosion tore the air apart. A flash of light brighter than day, heat that hid even through the boards. The ground shook. Windows blew inward. Then, silence. Only the crackle of small fires in the grass, the smell of cordite and blood. We waited, hearts pounding, rifles shaking in our hands. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, out in the smoke, something did. Not one, two. Shapes rising slow, limping, circling back toward the house. Ortiz whispered, "There's more than one." He was wrong. There were many. Dawn came slow, like the sky didn't want to look. The light crept through smoke and frost until the house, the field, the road, all of it came back into focus. What it showed didn't look like the place we defended the night before. The yard was torn to pieces. Mud churned into deep ruts, the grass blackened and wet with something that wasn't just blood. Chunks of wood from the porch lay 20 yards out, still smoking. The ditch was a crater, edges burnt, dirt thrown high like a shallow grave had opened itself. We moved carefully, rifles still ready, though nothing moved but the wind. Haynes was gone. All we found was what the blast had left, fragments of his vest, a piece of his tag chain, the smell of burned oil and iron. Ortiz knelt beside the crater, head bowed. He didn't say a word. None of us did. You don't say words when there aren't any worth saying. By the trucks, we found signs of something else. Fur, black and coarse, stuck to the metal like melted plastic. The tailgate of one Jeep was dented in, the shape of a handprint with too many knuckles. In the mud, we counted tracks, wide, deep, 5-toed, dozens of them. The cold sunlight made everything look cleaner than it should have. That's the trick of morning, it hides what you don't want to see. Around noon, the reinforcements came. Green trucks, fresh uniforms, men who looked like they hadn't slept in days but wouldn't say why. They didn't ask what happened. They already knew. They took photos, measured distances, bagged every scrap that wasn't nailed down. One of them, an officer I didn't recognize, pulled me aside. He had a clipboard and a face that didn't move much. He asked me to walk him through the event. I tried. The words didn't come easy. When I said the word creature, he flinched. When I said hands, he looked away. After I finished, he handed me a report. The header already filled in. Incident type, wildlife encounter. Cause, misidentified predator. Fatalities, 2 non-hostile. Recommended action, containment and classification. At the bottom, there was a line for my signature. I signed it, because that's what soldiers do. They told us to pack our gear, stay quiet, and wait for transport. We weren't to discuss what we'd seen, not with media, not with locals, not even with each other. Haynes became an equipment malfunction. Mason became missing in action. The rest became paperwork. Before we rolled out, I walked once more to the edge of the field. The smoke had cleared, and the ground had frozen again. Something about the silence felt final. But in that silence, I swore I could still hear breathing, faint and far, like it was just below the surface. By the time we got back to town, the Schmidts were gone, their truck missing from the lane. The farmhouse empty, curtains fluttering through broken windows. Neighbors said they'd packed overnight and left no forwarding address. A week later, the official order came down. All records sealed. Bray Road restricted zone. And just like that, it vanished. The story, the bodies, the proof. All of it folded into the quiet the same way the forest swallows sound. Sometimes, when I think about it, I wonder if we ever really left that place. If maybe, in some way, a part of us is still standing in that field, rifles raised, waiting for the next shape to step out of the smoke. And somewhere out there, in the cold Wisconsin dawn, something is still waiting to. It's been over 30 years since that winter in Wisconsin. Sometimes it feels like it happened to someone else. A name on an old report. A story told over coffee by men trying not to believe themselves. But when the air gets sharp and the leaves go brittle, when the cornfields turn to stubble and the sky looks too big for its own good, I remember every second. I drove down Bray Road again last fall. Didn't plan to. I was passing through, headed north to visit family. But the truck turned like it had its own memory. The pavements newer now, smoother. The ditches are overgrown, the old landmarks gone. The farmhouse is nothing but a dip in the earth and a few scattered stones. Still, the air felt the same. That strange stillness, heavy but not empty. The kind that makes your hands tighten on the wheel without realizing why. I pulled over where the road bends east, near where we lost the first truck. Got out, left the engine running. The sound of it idling felt like company. The wind came off the fields cold and flat, carrying that smell I never forgot, diesel, frost, and something under it, something sweet like wet leaves turning to rot. The place was quiet. No traffic, no birds. Just the soft hum of air and the creak of old trees shifting in the distance. And underneath that, something else. A pressure, faint but real, like the world around me was holding its breath again. I stood there for a while, boots in the gravel, looking across the fields. Could almost see us, younger, louder, pretending we weren't afraid. Mason leaned out the truck window, that same smart grin on his face. Haynes making coffee that smelled like tar. Ortiz cleaning his rifle with hands that shook even when he said they didn't. They're all gone now, different ways, different years. But they took that night with them. Every one of us did. You don't come back from something like that. You just learn to carry it quieter. For years after, I didn't sleep right. Every noise at night, a creak, a step, a breath, sounded like something circling again. Therapists called it trauma. Command called it stress. I just called it memory. I still keep a light on when it storms. Still check the backyard before bed. Not because I think it's out there, because I know it could be. People ask sometimes if I believe in monsters. I tell them no. Monsters belong in movies. They roar, they chase, and they die when the credits roll. What we meant wasn't that. It didn't need to roar. It didn't need to chase. It just watched, waited. It wasn't angry. It wasn't evil. It was curious. That's what makes it worse. Whatever it was, it knew our roads. It knew the space between the headlights and the tree line, that thin slice of dark where you can't quite see, but you keep looking anyway. It's strange what time does to memory. You start to doubt yourself, then you smell something familiar, hear a sound that shouldn't be there, and it's all back. The eyes, the wait, the silence that follows. I didn't stay long that day. When the sun dipped low and the shadows grew long, I felt that old ache behind my ribs, the one that whispers, it's time to go. I climbed back in the truck, started the engine, and drove until the fields turned to towns and the air smelled like people again. Before I reached the highway, I checked the rearview mirror once. The road behind me was empty, but for just a moment, I could have sworn I saw something at the edge of the ditch, a shape too still to be a trick of the light. I blinked and it was gone. Maybe I imagined it, or maybe it never left. If you ever find yourself driving near Elkhorn, out past the farms where the lights thin out and the road turns narrow, listen to me. Keep your eyes forward. Keep your windows up. And whatever you do, don't stop. People still talk about strange things out there. Animals torn apart, gates bent in half, shapes moving through the cornfields when the moon's low. Most folks laugh it off. They always do. That's how it starts, with laughter. With thinking you're safe because you've got a full tank and headlights that reach just far enough to make you brave. But bravery doesn't help you on Bray Road. If you see eyes in the field, glowing amber, steady, too high for a deer, don't look twice. Don't slow down. You'll want to. Something in you will want to look. But that's how it gets you. It waits for curiosity, not fear. And if your radio starts to hiss, if you hear that faint bottle whistle through the static, that means it's close. Keep driving. Don't pull over. Don't check the signal. Don't think you can reason with what's out there. I've seen it. I've seen what it does. The way it moves. The way it learns. And I can tell you this, it doesn't hunt the way animals do. It tests. The first time, it circled us. The second time, it pushed. By the third, it knew exactly where we'd run and how far we'd make it before we broke. It doesn't roar. It doesn't chase. It watches. It waits for you to blink or breathe or believe the night is just a night again. I've driven that road enough times to know the feeling, that moment when your stomach drops for no reason, when the headlights catch something that shouldn't be there, and you tell yourself it's nothing. That's when it's nearest. So here's my advice. If the fields go too quiet, if the air feels too still, if you get that crawling in your gut that says the dark has teeth, trust it. Turn around. Go back the way you came. And if you can't, if you're too far to turn back and the radio starts to whisper that old sound, keep your hands tight on the wheel. Keep your speed steady. And whatever you see on the side of the road, don't let it in. Don't slow for movement. Don't stop for shadows. Don't follow the lights that look like eyes, because it's not gone. Things like that don't disappear. They sink into the land the way bones do. They wait for the season when the air turns sharp and the cornfields die back and the nights outlast the mornings. That's when it comes, when the year starts to close and the roads go empty. So if you ever find yourself out there, alone between Elkhorn and Delavan, and you feel that weight pressing against your chest like the air's watching you, you are not imagining it. Keep driving. Don't stop. Don't look. And for God's sake, don't listen to the static, because it's still out there, waiting for the next convoy.